Hello and welcome. This is Robert Ferguson coming to you from the outstanding opulent studios here at the Center for American Institutions at Arizona State University. This is a bit of an experiment that we're trying here. We are trying to establish a little bit of an interview style podcast for both our donors and the public and anybody who's interested in learning about what we do here at the Center for American Institutions. The first guest on the show, the guinea pig, is Dr. Michael Kenny. Dr. Kenny is an instructional fellow here at the Center for American Institutions and over in the history department, and has been at the center for now how many years?
I've been here for 4 complete years, going on my 5th year.
Wow.
So actually, I predate the founding of the center.
Oh, really? Okay. Can you maybe give a little bit of that background?
Oh, well, I started working here when this was just a certificate program within the history faculty. That was the political history and leadership program. I was a postdoc within that program, and then like when was it? I guess 2022, I think, we launched the center, and everybody from the certificate program went into the center, and that's when we became the Center for American Institutions.
Okay, that's useful information. I'm brand new here, so I don't really know any of this background or any of this history.
You could write a history on that.
We could write a history on that. And you've also got some big news in your own life. You have a newborn baby son.
Yes, yes. Michael, we were very creative with our naming. He just turned 7 months, and it's been a blast hanging out with the baby. My wife and I couldn't be happier. He's amazing. He started crawling really early, so that's he does his bear crawl. Like he's great. Yeah.
So, what's your favorite part so far about being a dad?
Oh man. For the milestones, like it was really cool seeing him crawl for the first time, um, standing up and eating new foods. He loves ribeye steak. So it's great.
Yeah, that's really cool. It it's really impossible to explain to anybody who hasn't experienced it.
Yeah, you have kids yourself, right?
Yeah, and then I didn't understand it until like having kids, what that experience was like. People tried to explain it to me, but I didn't understand it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And actually, and it's given me a whole new respect for my parents, and we now have like a whole new set of things to talk about. And I've come to all these realizations. Like, yes, we've known this because I'm of course one of 6 kids, so my parents are professional parents, basically.
So where are you from originally then?
Oh, I'm from outside Philadelphia, a little township. We don't really have towns there. Township called Horsham. Uh, it's famous for no reason at all. Actually, it's not famous, but yeah, grew up there, lived most of my life on the East Coast, and I went to grad school actually in San Diego. So that's when I started coming out west, and been out for most of my adult life out in the West, broadly speaking, Arizona, California.
And do you make it back east at all?
Whenever I can. We try to get out of the heat every summer because it's 116, 117 here in Arizona. It's nice to get back to 90 degrees, even if we can live with the humidity just to get out of the heat. And of course, we try to go every Christmas. So it's,
That's great. And now, especially with the little boy,
oh yeah,
that makes those trips so much more special.
definitely.
So excellent. All right. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do here at the center?
Well, my main job here in the center is teaching and, of course, working on my own research, which means writing articles, books, or at least the best I can, get manuscripts out and constantly edit them. The courses I teach a survey on modern European history. That's where we go from the French Revolution of 1789 up to the present. And that's always a fun class because really, I don't even know what my last lecture is going to be on at the beginning of the semester. I just try to keep up with the news, and then whatever the real big thing going on that semester, that's my last lecture. So we actually focused on, the Social Democrat failure in Germany in 2025 last spring. Like that was, and I remember one semester, the week of my final lecture were the French presidential elections. So we focused on that. So it's a real fun topical course. The other course, of course, that I've co-taught with some people you might know, including yourself now, is the Foundations of Democracy. That's where we look at the great debates in political thought from antiquity to the present. It's a lot of fun teaching and couldn't be happier.
How do you find the students engage in the Foundations of Democracy class? Do you find that oftentimes they're dealing with material that is fairly abstract and fairly philosophical and not something that they would have ever encountered before. To some of them, it might be very difficult. How do they actually handle that?
Well, I think sometimes when they do the reading, they might be a little overwhelmed. That's why we try to guide them through it. It's really great the way we structure this class with each set of topics. So, for example, Enlightenment political thought. We'll take 3 classes on it. We'll do a lecture where I give them the important historical context and actually try to give them some ideas about what the text is saying. Then we do a discussion and, they might have some trouble with the reading, but I really try to ask probing questions to get them to think about really these timeless questions. They read Thomas Hobbes and they're not really sure what's going on, but they go, well, let's think about what does it actually mean to be sovereign, to have power in a political territory. That gets them thinking. And then we do a debate where a few students are really required to appropriate the ideas and think about the way people might counter those ideas. And through that debate, they really get a good feel for it. So I think it's tough for them, but over the span of a week and a half, they do pretty well, I think.
Yeah, this seems to me something that virtually every university student can benefit from. And it's a way to engage with philosophy in like an approachable and practical way without sacrificing any of the challenging notions, without challenging any of the complexity or sophistication.
Hmm. No, definitely. If they can't explain it, they don't know it. And that's why it's really good to get them to discuss the material. So,
Well, that's how I know when I'm lecturing and I'm in a really tricky situation that I don't actually know the material. That's why I start to like, oh, actually, maybe I don't know this as well as I thought I did. Yeah. So, all right. Well. So that's your teaching, and so I want to move now a little bit towards your research because I think your research is really, really interesting. But first of all, before we really dig into that, this is not your first experience at Arizona State University, is it?
it is not.
Can you tell me a little bit about your first encounter with Arizona State University?
Well, so many, many years ago, when I was still young, I took actually, it was 2 summers in a row, I took a language course here. So it was way back 2010 to 2011. I was looking for a place to study Serbo-Croatian for my research, which we'll get into in a little bit. And it turned out Arizona State had a program that was in part funded by the State Department. So it was actually relatively affordable. I came out here for 1 summer, took introductory Serbo-Croatian, or as we now call it, Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian. It's a whole mess on what you actually call the language. And actually, some people will certainly get in fights over that, but we'll just say Serbo-Croatian. And then the second summer, I took intermediate Serbo-Croatian, followed by a 1-month trip to Sarajevo, Bosnia through Arizona State. And that was a really great experience. The campus looks entirely different now, but it was great. I really enjoyed all my years here at Arizona State.
So what would be some advice you'd give to all of our listeners who are clearly eager to learn Serbo-Croatian?
Huh.
Do you have any advice for them?
Oh man, uh, talk to yourself. You There's really no substitute to just practicing the language, and there are a whole lot of Serbo-Croatian speakers here, so just constantly uh, keep it fresh in your mind. I'm very old school. I use note cards. I'll like just spend hours flipping through note cards, looking at translations. Uh, yeah, you just have to practice and don't give up because a language can be very frustrating at first, but take your time with it. And I would say, I don't know how many people actually want to learn Serbo-Croatian, but any language I think that is applicable for. So,
Well, you never know how many people are eager to learn that language.
I
So.
know.
Okay, so You're a scholar of the Habsburg Empire.
Yes.
And I'm assuming most of the people that are listening to this interview, the millions and millions that are listening to it, are probably not experts on the Habsburg Empire. Can you give us a little history of what you're actually talking about when you say the Habsburg Empire?
Right. So there are many different terms we use synonymously with the Habsburg Empire in history. Sometimes you'll hear Austria, sometimes you'll hear Austria-Hungary, sometimes erroneously you'll hear the Holy Roman Empire. But and I can kind of unpack how these terms come together. So the thing that we call the Habsburg Empire really first came into existence in the year 1526. It was in that year that the Archduke of Austria, Ferdinand the First of von Habsburg, so of the House of Habsburg, he became king of Hungary, Bohemia, and Croatia, hence the Serbo-Croatian connection. Now, the Habsburg family had been around for a long time. They had been archdukes of Austria since the 13th century, had gradually amassed more territory, extending through what is now all of present-day Austria and into northern Italy. In 1526, though, this became something resembling an actual empire. Now, it was a dynastic territory, but the Habsburgs did set up certain state institutions. They had an actual military corresponding to this big territory. They set up more bureaucracies for basically the organizational administration. It did become a state. Now, it's also important to note, around this time, the Habsburgs also became Holy Roman Emperors. So these are two separate titles. The head of this realm of that the Habsburgs possess in Eastern Central Europe, and their title as Holy Roman Empire. Both are very important, but they are separate. Now, the Eastern and Central European realm, over the next few centuries, this will grow to include territory of about 11 ethno-national groups, depending on how you count them. And we're talking everywhere from what is today Ukraine to Italy. Okay, so the huge swath of territory in Central and Eastern Europe. Uh, so that just gives you a little bit of a sense of what this is exactly.
Could
Uh,
you also maybe explain how the Spanish fit into that?
so the the Habsburg family had multiple territories throughout Europe. Remember the first Habsburg emperor, Ferdinand the First. His older brother Charles the Fifth was the king of Spain and the Holy Roman Emperor. So basically their cousins were kings of Spain, and they would remain there until the early 18th century when the Bourbon dynasty, more famous for their French possession, would become kings of Spain. But they're always very close, uh, allied together in wars, and these are, it's a family, a set of family possessions.
Right. Interesting. So what's the role of Catholicism?
Well, that gets us into the history, I think, of the Habsburgs. I really set up what it
Right.
is.
Sure.
So
That's great.
what was the mission of the Habsburgs? What were they doing? Well, obviously, with any dynastic family, their first objective is to keep their territory together. Now, over the centuries from the 16th century up to the 18th century, that involved two main tasks. One, defend their territory from the Ottoman Empire, this Turkish Islamic empire on the basically just outside what was considered Europe. Now, in the process of defending the realm from the Turks, there was this mythos created of the Habsburgs as defenders of Christian Europe. And that really resonated among a lot of people, not just in the Habsburg realm, but throughout all of Europe. On top of that, the other crucial mission was defending the Catholic Church from the Protestant Reformation. So, of course, Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, these are the ideas of Martin Luther, John Calvin. These are starting to creep into the realm of the Habsburgs, and the emperor, well, and actually several emperors from the 16th to 17th century, believed no, the Habsburgs need to remain Catholic. Why? Depended on the emperor. Some of them, it was power considerations. They believed a unified empire was good for them. Uh, there was also a certain, I guess you would say, link between Protestantism and independence of smaller princes, so that was a consideration. But others, for example, Ferdinand II, who was emperor in the early 17th century, was just a devout Catholic. He spent his spare time in prayer and was really a zealot and did not want to allow the people of his realm to, risk their souls by becoming Protestant. So these are two really essential elements that build up this idea of the Habsburgs as defenders of Christendom and the Roman Catholic Church.
Okay, and I think this gives us an opportunity to delve further into, you mentioned the Holy Roman Empire and their role as Holy Roman Emperor versus their dynastic possessions. So how in the Holy Roman Empires, especially after the 30 Years' War, there is generally, and I could be wrong on this, but um, there, according to the Treaty of Augsburg, which might have predated actually the 30 Years' War. I have that a century earlier, but that that the little principate would follow the religion of the noble or the prince, correct? So in the Holy Roman Empire, they have to tolerate a certain degree of Protestantism, correct? Whereas in their dynastic possessions, they don't have that. They're able to.
That is, yeah, that is absolutely correct. And the Peace of Augsburg, 1555, was a big compromise where the prince could determine the religion. Now, the problem is this was always a tenuous agreement because people would push for a new succession, especially in Bohemia, where technically the King of Bohemia was also the Holy Roman Emperor and the Archduke of Austria. Now, the idea was, if we can bring a Protestant in, and the Bohemians did briefly elect a Protestant, though this was considered illegitimate by the Habsburg family, you would always get that tension between rival princes. And what's really interesting is we have to think, well, how was the Holy Roman Emperor selected? It was a vote. Believe it or not, it was an elected monarchy. There were 7 electors. And on the eve of the 30 Years' War, when there was this controversy in Bohemia, you actually had 4 Catholics and 3 Protestants. So the hope was if the King of Bohemia can become Protestant, they can flip it. And there was talk about, making the King of Sweden the new Holy Roman Empire, of course, a devout Protestant. So
That was
yes, the
was
Peace
it
of
all?
Augsburg exists, but it's very tenuous peace.
Sure. And just delving further into what you just said, that the King of Bohemia was an elector
Yes,
for the
for
Holy Roman
the Holy
Emperor.
Roman Emperor.
Right.
Yes.
And the Habsburg family was an elector to that position based on their possession of the crown of Bohemia,
Yes,
correct?
not on their position as the Habsburg Emperor, as the King of Hungary, the King of Croatia, because those were technically outside the bounds of the Holy Roman Empire. It actually, when I explain this to my students, I say the Habsburg Empire and the Holy Roman Empire were basically a Venn diagram. You have parts of the Holy Roman Empire that are outside. You have parts of the Habsburg Empire that are outside, but the Austrian hereditary lands and Bohemia are within both. Right. Yes.
Right. Yeah, I'm asking these questions because I spent years trying to understand this, and I still don't fully understand it. Didn't study it at the level that you do, but
Patient. It
yeah,
requires a lot of patience.
right. But and this also kind of builds into this like kind of inherent instability
Mhm.
inside of the Habsburg Empire, not just within the Holy Roman Empire, but in the Habsburg Empire itself, where maybe they had a little bit more control. But there still does appear to be that instability. I mean, in Bohemia, you've got this attempt to install a Protestant.
Mhm.
How does that, I mean, I'm asking a broad question here, but does that instability remain in the system after the 16th century, 17th century, all the way through to the 20th century?
Well, in some ways, I would say more than an instability, it's a challenge. And these challenges, in some ways, do create unity. It creates a certain rallying cry when there's a very clear opponent or, like I said, challenge to the crown. It's always possible to, uh, you know, build this. coalition, unity. The army has something to fight for. And actually, what's interesting, for much of the 18th century, that went away. Uh, the Habsburg Empire was firmly Catholic. There were other religions that you had to have a license, but the monarchy generally granted licenses. But we're talking roughly 80% of the population is Catholic. On top of that, in the 18th century, the Turkish threat really goes away. Now, and this is starting to get closer to my research, there's a whole new set of obstacles in the 19th century going into the 20th century, and that is modern political ideas. Modern political ideas, liberalism, and especially nationalism. And this, in a sense, although, again, it's creating a certain degree of instability, it is giving the empire itself a certain ethos that people believe will combat these new ideas.
Right. I mean, I can imagine if you have an imperial power that is that is at least largely to or to a significant degree, basing its right to rule on Catholicism, on this very old idea that 19th century ideas of nationalism are an absolute threat to this.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
When the question always is, where does modern history really start? And, we typically say the French Revolution. And the French Revolution really took on international importance when the Jacobins and the National Assembly, the Constituent Assembly, whatever it was called, up to 1792, decided to declare war on Austria. Because this is when it's really this almost Manichaean war. It's the revolution versus the tradition of monarchy. Of course, the revolutionaries themselves were doing all these secularizing measures and stating in the Rights of Man that the nation is sovereign. So they go to war with, well, the exact opposite state, this multinational dynastic state that, in the official title of the emperor, he does not rule by the grace of the people. It is by God's grace that he is emperor. So
Reason is it looks a little bit different from the person, their the way that the French would interpret reason in the 1790s. There's an absolute threat to that concept and that idea.
Sure, and let's not forget that the French monarchy that many of them hated so much was actually related to the Habsburgs.
And Marie Antoinette,
yes, was related, of course, to Joseph II.
Right. So, and is there a resemblance today between the Habsburg Empire and the European Union?
A little bit. There is. I think the big commonality is this balance between local self-governance and the interest of a broader multinational, multi-ethnic,
Supranational.
Yeah, supranational, particularly in terms of security interest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always a balance. And I think the Habsburgs actually did a fair job allowing degrees of self-governance. Now, obviously, there are times when this ebbs and flows. There are some people that would say that, well, it's a complicated story, but some people would say that self-governance was the obstacle to progress and that you actually had to get the entire empire on the same page. These, of course, were the ideas of Joseph II, enlightened absolutism. But there is always that balance. And, well, I think there might be some other similarities, but I'm not sure how much time we have to go into that.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So what's your opinion of the Habsburg Empire?
Well, aside from being incredibly fascinating, I do think it was a fairly rational system. I think when you look at what happens to Europe after it dissolves, hindsight's always 20.
When you say dissolve, what do you mean?
I was about to get into that. And of course, the Habsburg Empire comes to an end in 1918. We could say up to 1919, depending on where exactly we date it. But it's the end of the First World War that brings this multinational dynastic state to an end. in November of 1918, Emperor Karl, the final Habsburg emperor, is forced to abdicate, though he doesn't technically abdicate. He renounces his duties in the affairs of the state. And on top of that, rather than having a multinational empire, it is broken up into several different constitutional states. These are states like briefly the Republic of Hungary, and then I suppose the Kingdom of Hungary. Then you have part of it going to Romania, which of course already exists. Yugoslavia becomes a new state. Czechoslovakia becomes a new state. The rump of Austria becomes a German republic. So that is what we talk about with the dissolution. Now, a lot of people thought, well, once we just give people national self-governance, everything will be fine. There is, of course, a danger in that, because when we think about it, what was the first article of the Constitution of all these new states? The people have sovereignty. Now, the issue with people is it can mean two different things. Does it mean, in German, Leute, the people who live in a place? Well, in German, no, it was Volk, which had a certain ethnic connotation. In the Slavic languages, they would use the word Narod. So now the thing that is sovereign is generally the ethnic majority, or at least the plurality. And that actually creates a whole new set of tensions that didn't quite exist when the people were not sovereign, and instead the monarch was sovereign and who existed as this type of neutral arbiter. Now, uh, not to sound like an apologist for monarchy, but it is important to note that when you know, push these old ideas away, it's easy to say, well, there were a lot of problems with it, but we have to also consider, what did it do right? And what are some new obstacles that we're going to face with these big changes?
Sure. And I guess the Habsburg dynasty, it's not like it grabbed all of its power in one moment.
No.
It developed over centuries.
Yes.
And when you develop over centuries, there's this element of practicality that comes into the system, right? It's not necessarily just imposed ideologically.
Right, right. In fact, I think a lot of the ideology came after the fact. And there's the old saying, other states go to war, the Habsburgs marry.
Right.
They actually just married the right people, outlived their rivals. And I think when this happens, I mean, that itself is something that's going to happen over a generation. When that happens, the culture gradually changes to match the political reality. And it's not this overnight redrawing of the map.
Even in, let's say, an example being the Norman conquest of England, right, is a very sudden change on English institutions in the way that the Habsburgs did not have that sudden moment.
Right, right. Um, yeah, no, certainly.
Okay, so we've discussed the Habsburgs enough in broad strokes. Let's get into your research. What can you explain a little bit about your own research, and what's the topic of your main interest?
Well, I actually focus on the politics of the late Habsburg Empire, and this is where we can get into another name for it, and that is Austria-Hungary. So in the year 1867, a great compromise was reached. Uh, the the Habsburg realm turned into a constitutional state. Now, wherever you lived in this state, you had certain constitutional rights. Furthermore, there were two parliamentary systems set up, one in Hungary and the other in the rest of the territory, which was colloquially known as Austria. So you now have a legislature that is full of people voted in. There's still, of course, an upper house where the lords sit. Well, actually, the upper house in itself is interesting. The House of Rothschild had a seat there, and so did the Archbishop of Vienna, but not to get caught in the weeds. And the monarch had absolute veto over both halves. But you were starting to develop a type of parliamentary system. Now, my research focuses particularly on the Christian Social Party, a party that officially formed in the year 1891, though it had been gradually coming together as a type of intellectual circle that was dissatisfied with liberalism. Liberalism in many ways, as a political idea that threatened the monarchical principle, also as an economic idea. They were very dissatisfied with the situation in industrial capitalist Europe and Austria, particularly. And really, it started as a group dedicated to socioeconomic reform and gradually became a full political party that participated in the Austrian parliamentary structure.
So you mentioned that the party is, on the one hand, trying to defend the monarchy, right?
Yes.
And also trying to protect against industrial capitalism,
Yes.
correct? So what's their relationship with modernity?
Well, there's a sense of seeing them as a completely anti-modern state, and they certainly value traditions. Uh,
Sorry, party or state?
there's a tendency to view the party as completely anti-modern. They're concerned about modernity. They're concerned about unintended consequences of free market capitalism, of liberalism, which they believed, could, if not guided properly, could go to a state of licentiousness. They wanted to protect this using traditions and kind of guide modernity in the right direction. I think that's probably the best way.
Okay, so they're sort of in that late 19th century milieu of not recognizing that there's no stopping modernity,
Yes.
right? But trying to kind of guide it in a certain safer, progressive, or safer sort of progress.
Yes. I mean, they they depended on votes. They were still a type of Democratic Party. In fact, uh, the wing of the party that's gotten the most attention has been its populist wing. And yeah, they did have certain populist streaks in them. They wanted to get elected. They wanted to participate in the Reichsrat, which is the term for the parliament. Actually, it's the broader legislature. And they wanted that to function. They were trying to always protect parliamentary order. They really were trying to bring together these two seemingly irreconcilable things. The idea of monarchical grace as kind of the thing that really drives the state, and the rule of law. They really did not want to abandon the rule of law at any point.
So they were happy about, for instance, the rights that individuals in the empire had received with the 1867 compromise,
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Right, but that didn't mean they wanted to, but they also wanted to preserve, right,
Yes.
much of the society and much of the culture and the institutions, correct?
Yes, yes, and actually, one of the biggest parts of my research is focusing on their ideas of constitutional reform, and of course, this never meant getting rid of the Constitution.
Mhm.
Interestingly, they wanted to their model was actually the United States. They wanted to create a more federal structure where you would basically break the empire into smaller pieces that would have greater legislative autonomy while maintaining the executive power of the monarch. Which is interesting that they, in some ways, actually said we need to increase the executive power of the monarch using the United States as a model, but that might be it might be a separate question altogether.
Well, it reminds me a little bit of what was going on in Russia at the time, where under Alexander the Third initially, and then particularly after the 1905 revolution, you had this group called the Octoberists,
Yes.
right, who are committed to the constitutional compromise of 1905, but they also want to preserve the Romanov dynasty. They want to preserve the Russian Empire. However, at the same time, they're committed to a certain type of modernity.
Right, right.
Right.
Though what's interesting, uh, many people in the empire wanted to preserve the empire. That was something everyone agreed on. The socialists wanted to preserve it because they thought, wow, this actually, if we keep this together, it is the largest free trade zone in all of Europe. The liberals wanted to keep it together. They thought, man, we are at the cutting edge of creating a good bourgeois civil society with our constitutional rights. Obviously, the Christian socials did, but the thing that the Christian socials differed on was the essential nature of the crown. And I think they grasped that Austria was different than other states. In France, if you get rid of the Bourbons, you still have France. in the old Habsburg Empire, if you got rid of the monarch, you possibly, and I would say probably, will not have the realm anymore. He was the thing that really kept together the empire. So I think in some ways, the Christian Social Party, though we may see them as out of touch with the modern world, they actually had probably the most realistic plan for preserving what the empire actually needed to function as it had been functioning.
Well, and yeah, I think that's an interesting point on the necessity of the actual crowned head, because it's the one thing that everybody could sort of agree on and had in common, whether you were in Bohemia or whether in your what would become Ruthenia or Bosnia. I mean, Bosnia, bad example maybe, but Croatia. Um, the and I think today a little bit of, the British Commonwealth,
Mhm.
right? I mean, these people around the world are all it's a much looser, it's a much more it's nowhere near as official a connection between the British Crown and the Commonwealth. But if you were to get rid of the royal family, they have no connection to the UK Parliament,
Mhm.
right? And so with neither an official connection nor any particular affection for it. And so without that crowned head, the Commonwealth would fall apart.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And of course, this is a much more structured, official political body in the way that the British Commonwealth is not. But I can see how the necessity of the crowned head connects everybody in an identity, in an interesting multinational fashion.
Yes, and the thing we have to remember about this multinational nature, it's not just connecting Ruthenia to Bohemia. We have to understand that if you look at a map, it's, let's say, an ethno-national map, it looks kind of orderly, but within any town, you have ethnic minorities. You have Czechs and Germans, you have Italians and Croats, you have Ruthenians or Ukrainians, as we now call them, and Poles. Uh, the so really you needed this neutral arbiter that could tie the people together in some way. Um, so I think it's actually probably every issue that you would have with the Commonwealth, it's even more pronounced in the old Austro-Hungarian Empire.
That's a really important point because if you have if somebody as we see when the empire splits up, and as you mentioned, that the ethnic majority in or plurality in
Mhm.
most cases gets to fully set the agenda of these new states. Um, this is an acute threat to the rights of ethnic minorities.
Potentially, yeah. Now, obviously, in Czechoslovakia, you had, the first president, Thomas Masaryk, really tried to make a point of protecting the different ethnic minorities. And I think generally people see Czechoslovakia as the one success story, though a
However,
lot of Slovaks were dissatisfied. And obviously the Germans in the Sudetenland were dissatisfied, but
sure.
that's a separate question entirely.
But I mean, I think you also, if you take a look at Transcarpathia, right, you've got Ukrainian, a Ukrainian ethnic minority there that was very dissatisfied
Oh,
with
yeah,
their
well,
position
I
in the
mean,
Czechoslovakian Republic.
right, right. So that would be one case. And then I think it gets even worse when you look at the Ukrainian situation in southern Poland. I mean, the Poles really were dead set. Obviously, they were split between different factions, but certainly there was a group of ethno nationalists that truly wanted to make Poland an ethnic Polish state. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. So, where are the Christian socialists particularly popular and or powerful?
so the Christian Social Party formed in Vienna. It was a group of people that got together each week to discuss their plans for socioeconomic reform and general political outlook. After the party is officially founded in 1891, they really start to develop, they start to become successful in the Vienna municipal elections. And by 1895 to 97, the leader and founder of the party, Karl Lueger, becomes mayor of Vienna. So Vienna is really their base. But shortly after that, they extend into the provinces. And by 1907, the party has a coalition with the Alpine Catholics. And really, they're the strongest and largest party in all of Austria, but they're really big in the German-speaking parts of Austria.
Okay. So, Lueger,
And actually, just one more thing. Ironically, Lueger, who you're about to ask, he died in 1910, and after that, the party's actually much more popular in the Alpine countries than they are in Vienna. Now, they still do fairly well in Vienna. They still will have the mayor of Vienna until, oh, I should have checked the year ahead of time, but at the end of the First World War. Uh, but that's just an interesting transformation in the party. And then after the dissolution of the empire in the Austrian Republic, they'll really control the provinces, but Vienna will be completely social democratic.
Hmm. And I mean, I think that, I mean, people's experience in Vienna now, if you're a tourist and you go to Vienna,
Mhm.
I mean, you can certainly see the legacy of the Christian Social Party. I mean, especially Lueger's administration. I mean, so much of what is considered this iconic Habsburg Vienna
Mhm.
was, developed under him.
The infrastructure, basically gas and electric socialism, as they called it. And actually, there was usually a complaint against the Christian Social Party that they didn't invest enough in parks, but they invested a lot. I mean, Vienna's a very green city. I don't mean, green politically. I mean, there are just a lot of parks and trees, and that was a secondary project for the Christian socials at the municipal level.
So I can't think of the name of the big island park in the Danube, the famous,
Oh yeah, with the giant thing that people bungee jump.
right, yeah.
Praterstern?
Something like that,
Yeah,
yeah. But I think that was his administration. I think that was a largely a creation of that administration, correct? Or maybe it might have been earlier.
you're putting me on the spot.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That I know that Parks and Recreation was your
Oh yeah,
your
yeah.
anyway. Okay. But I guess why I was asking that question is that I think it connects the idea of the Christian Social Party in this, because it is a modernization movement of Vienna that's occurring, correct?
Yes.
But it's also the emperor is front and center,
Mhm.
right? The Ringstrasse, the emperor, the dynasty is front and center,
Yes.
even though it is this modernization, yeah, project.
Yeah, yeah. Certainly. The I actually think one of the craziest things about Vienna is, in the final years before the First World War, you had annual Corpus Christi processions. This is where the devout Catholics of Vienna would usually process around the Ringstrasse, which is, of course, for those who don't know, the Ringstrasse is this huge boulevard that makes a ring, basically a semicircle around the city connecting to the main canal. Uh, it used to be the old city wall. It was torn down in the 1850s to create the boulevard, much like the similar projects in Paris at the time. But anyway, they would process with the consecrated host from the Catholic liturgy with the emperor at the head, showing this union of altar and throne in just a really vivid way. And at the same time, you would have, Sigmund Freud was starting his meetings of the International what is it? Association for Psychoanalysis, or I forget the name. But you had these two things going on at the same time. Vienna was all things to all people. It's also the music and artistic capital of the world at the time. I know the Parisians might disagree with the latter, but it's, it's the Vienna of Gustav Klimt. Uh, it's also, you know, the Vienna of Karl Lueger. It's many different things at this point.
Um, so what is the thesis of your work?
So my thesis is that in the final decades of the empire's existence, of course, leading up to the 1918 dissolution, as the Habsburg Empire became increasingly threatened by the prospect of dissolution, the Christian socials increasingly centered their activity on the defense of the state. Okay. Now, that in itself is a bit of an argument saying that this was their main activity. And it, you know, there what they were doing at the municipal level, it still mattered, but what they really put their intellectual and many of their practical efforts into was defense of the state. Um, now,
Against who?
well, that's I would say there are two subclaims within this argument. I'll say against whom in a moment, but the first of all, there's why did they do it? Why did they really stake so much in both the empire as a whole and the dynastic rule of it? Because they saw the empire as a uniquely traditional state that could help protect all the good that they saw in the traditional world. Now, of course, uniquely traditional, it had a centuries-old monarch as the head of state, going back to the 13th century. It also was the traditional defender of Catholicism, and it had a certain Catholic leading culture that the Christian socials wanted to preserve. That's why they linked the empire's existence with the traditional world that they wanted to protect. Now, what did this practically look like? That gets to your question, what were they protecting it against? Ethno-nationalism. Ethno-nationalism was the greatest threat, and this, of course, was the principle in which the ethnic nation would be sovereign within a given territory. That's the first part of it. And the second part was that one's identity was bound up with their existence in the nation. Now, this, of course, was a dual threat because, well, actually, in some ways, a threefold threat. First of all, they believed, no, stable sovereignty has to be centered in the crown, not the nation. Second, in a multinational state, you can't really have any single nation be sovereign. And third, when we think about this question of identity, the identity that mattered to most of them was a Roman Catholic. That was what truly mattered. And when we have to actually remember, ethno-nationalism had a lot of cachet at this time. It would have been advantageous to lean into the ethno-nationalism. And what I've actually found in my research is that there were some members in the party who were willing to go along with this. And as a whole, the Christian Social Party always put this down. They said, no, we cannot do this. In fact, there's a really interesting debate in 1897 on this, where they were talking about, well, what is the proper way for us to think about ethnic Jewish people, so people from a Jewish lineage? And, with the mainstream of the party really trying to correct this ethno-national lean. I mean, I could go on.
Well, no, because that actually anticipates what my next question was going to be. Because if I was going to criticize, my first instinct, not knowing that much about the Christian socialists, is that this party is trying to is trying to stop ethno-nationalism. And so, again, what is the relationship between that and anti-Semitism?
Well, first of all, the party, by and large, became less anti-Semitic over time. And I will say they were part of this broader circle of anti-Semites in the 1880s who really appealed to what we might call the lower middle class, the artisanal class of Vienna. You really had more than two, but two main leaders of these movements, Georg von Schöner, who really leaned into the ethno-nationalism. He believed that the German people were a single race, they were one blood, and they should create a greater German state, and that the Jews, no matter how hard they tried, could never be German. The other faction was the people around Karl Lueger, who viewed the problem of Judaism as more socioeconomic. They scapegoated the Jews as, part of this wealthy elite that was keeping people down, though it was never really, it was never as black and white saying, because of your Jewish blood, you cannot escape that fate. Now, the big debate in 1897 is the Reichspost, which was the primary organ of the Christian Social Party, actually said, we can't just have this pale, blind hatred for Jews. We have to remember that the founding Christians were Semites, that we wouldn't have Christianity if it weren't for the Semitic people. And you actually do have quite a few people from Jewish families who were converts to Catholicism, who were leading figures within the Christian Social Party, most famously Albert Gaisman, the vice president under Lueger, and Josip Purzer, the vice mayor under Lueger. And what's fascinating, the um, the more tied to Judaism uh, somebody was, the more Catholic conservative they were. They tended to be very much the throne and altar type people, and the people who really believed in this Habsburg mission as a multinational unifier. So that's where I would say the distinction between ethno-nationalism is. In terms of, well, still it's anti-Semitic. That really does border on the ethno-nationalism. Some of the most uh, devoted anti-Semites, for example, Herman Bilovavlek, who ironically has a Czech name, and member of the Christian Social Party, once he was elected to the Reichspost, the Reichstag, the parliament, he pretty much gave up all these anti-Semitic ideas. He changed the name of his newspaper from the Antisemitische Volksblatt, the anti-Semitic people's paper, to the Austrian people's paper. And interestingly, one of the people who becomes an increasingly important figure during the First World War, Ignaz Seipel, who will go on to become chancellor and himself was a Catholic priest, famously said, anti-Semitism is a thing of the gutter. So I'm not whitewashing the role of anti-Semitism in the party, but I'm following in a certain historiographical tradition that sees it as one part of a broader coalition.
Well, it sounds to me the way that you're suggesting it is that a major part of their base is this artisanal class in the German parts of the empire.
That's certain.
Right. And anti-Semitism is a major force in those circles. And that if you're a cosmopolitan party leader, you might not actually believe in this stuff, or you believe in it in a more moderated sense.
Right.
As opposed to the artisanal classes where it's very hot and heavy and, you're a political party. You're trying to get votes.
Right.
How are you going to appeal to your base is going to have some say over what you say, right?
Right. No, that's certainly the case, which actually, so that's one of the reasons that, and I think there was a conscious attempt to get away from this. And in the first decade of the 20th century, we tended to see a focus more on cultural issues, making sure that elementary school teachers were good Catholics and things like that. And part of that also has to do with the fact that in Vienna and the German-speaking territory, the new enemy was no longer the old liberals who were, well, the switch is that social democrats are the new enemy. Now, obviously, there are some people who would link social democracy to Judaism in some way, uh, but I think it really became a more militant battle of the Catholic Empire versus the Social Democratic Empire. That's really the transformation here.
Right. And so maybe we should, people who study the 1920s in Vienna or 1930s in Vienna might want to be careful about reading that history too far back into the late 19th and early 20th century.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, so one of the people who has really influenced my work is a historian by the name of John Boyer. He wrote a massive 2-volume work, and he said this is precisely the thing we have to avoid. And really what he was talking about is we shouldn't see the pre-1918 Christian Social Party as a clerical party. Certainly Catholicism is an important part of their cultural values, and that many of them are devout Catholics. But it was a party that was trying to guide modernity, and maintain the leading position of the dynasty. That really was their broad focus. And Catholicism played a role in that, but it was not front and center to the party.
Okay. So what's the relationship between the Christian Social Party and the collapse of the empire?
Well, this is really interesting because the collapse of the empire unquestionably was due to the First World War. This is real. I mean, now I've had people say, well, wasn't inevitable. Of course it wasn't inevitable when the war broke out, but it was a major factor, mass starvation, people losing trust in this institution. The Christian
Sorry if you just again the mass starvation. Can you
Oh, during
put a
First
little more
World War,
color
okay,
about
so
that?
during the First World War, Vienna was facing Vienna and actually all of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was facing particularly difficult conditions. There, of course, was a blockade on the continent, the British blockade. Uh, Resources were very scarce, and you had to feed very large armies, and even the military rations weren't even that much. Uh, yeah, you have really severe famine within the empire at this point. That was a big part of it. You also have jailing of political prisoners, um, the occupation of Bosnia, and really the military rule there. The way Austria was forced to deal with the domestic population during the time of war did really discredit it in the eyes of many people. Now, the Christian Social Party, they were huge supporters of the war effort because they saw Serbia, the main enemy at the beginning of the war, as this state that represented the modern nation state. They were trying to take the other South Slavic peoples, be they Serb, Croat, or Bosnian, they all speak this Serbo-Croatian language, and they thought, okay, we have to put down this threat. So the Christian socials really did support the war effort. Now, what's interesting, with the ascension of Emperor Karl, so that Franz Josef had been the previous emperor, had ruled since 1848. He died in November of 1916. Once Karl becomes the emperor, he offers amnesty toward political prisoners and immediately starts looking for peace. And at this time, the Christian Social Party actually supports the efforts for peace. Um, and they really do still see themselves as trying to protect the emperor. Now, what's fascinating in the last year of the war, you think of an American who maybe they know a little bit about this time period. They know Woodrow Wilson and the idea of national self-determination. The Christian Socials said, yes, give the people a vote. Even with these conditions, we are still confident that they will vote to maintain the dynasty. So it was at this moment where the Christian Social Party is saying, okay, history is about to turn, and we can make sure that it turns in a way that maintains the Habsburg Empire. Now, maybe it'll be a looser federation, but we'll still have this empire, really something like what we see with the Commonwealth today. Um, this, for better or worse, doesn't work out. And they're still in conversation with Emperor Karl in November 1918. But eventually they say, look, we can't protect your safety if you do not renounce your title, because many people in the city of Vienna particularly were looking for him to leave immediately. So Christian socials really do play an important role. They're trying to protect the dynasty, but they're also trying to maintain peace. And these are starting to become, I suppose, countervailing goals.
Okay. And I want to be cognizant of time here. We've talked
Okay.
for almost an hour.
Oh.
So, we've had a really it's been a great conversation. But I just want to finish by asking, are there any lessons that you see in either the way that the Christian Social Party uh, participated in the last years of the empire, or in the collapse of the Habsburg Empire itself that maybe either the EU needs to be aware of, or lessons of that for EU policymakers today, and maybe even American policymakers and voters?
Um, I have a lot of ideas rushing through my head, and I'm not sure if this is going to answer it, but one of the things that I actually strikes me about the end of it, let's look at Emperor Karl. Emperor Karl he became the emperor in 1916 at the age of 29, succeeding his uncle, he had been the emperor for 68 years. Now, he saw firsthand the condition of people in Vienna. He saw the, you know, mountains of dead bodies on the battlefield. He wanted out of the war, but he also really took to heart I have a responsibility to the people. And one of the things he did actually, he and his family started eating only military rations. So whatever food the soldiers ate, his family would eat only that food. Um, and I think that's a lesson that politicians everywhere could learn. I think, you know, if you want to go to war, you need to be ready to sacrifice in the way that you're expecting the least of your people to sacrifice. Um, Maybe just a closing thought there. But I don't know if that really answered your question about the grand dissolution, but I'd say the process in which it came to an end, it's something to keep in mind.
Well, that being able to connect yourself in some way to the people, even in that dark moment, I mean, as unpopular as the Habsburgs became, the Habsburg family does not go away
No,
in 1918, does it?
no, well, so interestingly, when Karl died in exile off the coast of Morocco, his wife was pregnant with her eighth child. So I believe something in 2004, I believe it was, Karl actually was beatified in the Catholic Church for his peace efforts, and his descendants were there, and there were something like 300 of them. So um, the Habsburgs are still there. They're still influential figures in Austria. Uh, they're not clamoring to get the throne back, but they don't go away.
Well, I mean, I was thinking in particular of Otto,
Yeah, Otto, yes.
for he was very influential in the collapse of the in the collapse of the Iron Curtain, right? And anyway, all right. Well, Dr. Kenny, thank you very much for your time, and I learned a lot. So thank you very much.
Pleasure was all mine. Thank you.